This is Michael Popok, Legal AF. Well, if you've never heard of Simpatico software systems and Berkeley Research Group, tune in because they are now at the heart of the investigation for Jack Smith and the Department of Justice investigators trying to link Donald Trump to knowledge, criminal knowledge, that what he was saying about the election, that it was stolen from him or that it was fraudulent, was false. And Jack Smith's trying to do it with his investigators through these two companies. One we knew about, Berkeley Research Group, hired for $600,000 right around the time of the election and after the election to analyze voter data and report back directly to Donald Trump and Mark Meadows in the White House. And they reported that there was no voter fraud that they could detect in Georgia, in Nevada. There was no dead people voting and the rest, all these crazy theories that Donald Trump and those around him, Peter Navarro, Mark Meadows, Rudy Giuliani, Flynn, and Sidney Powell, were wrong. And Donald Trump was told that directly by Berkeley Research Group. But they weren't the only ones. We now know, reporting in the Washington Post, that there is another company, Simpatico Software Systems, looks to be a legitimate company based in Warwick, Rhode Island, who focuses its business on using forensic software and analytics to get to the bottom of whether there's fraud or not. They're a fraud forensic examiner using sophisticated software data in order to do that. And they sell their services, as we'll post here, from their own website and on their own LinkedIn. They sell their services to local governments and governments looking for fraud, and private enterprise doing the same thing. The founder of the company, Ken Block, has already revealed to the Washington Post that the company has been subpoenaed by Jack Smith, and Jack Smith wants to know about the $750,000 that Simpatico received from Donald Trump's campaign in order to analyze 12 or more ridiculous working theories of voter fraud in the battleground states and otherwise. That's what Ken Block was hired for. That's what he took the $750,000 for. First check came 3 days after the election, and he delivered his findings to the Trump campaign. Now, that's the big distinction. But remember, all this evidence and witnesses are now in front of Jack Smith, both the Berkeley Research Group and Simpatico software systems. They're slightly different. Berkeley Research Group has told Jack Smith and the investigators that they met with Donald Trump in the White House and with Mark Meadows and delivered their findings, and told them right around the same time that Donald Trump's Save America PAC was raising $250 million through what the Department of Justice is looking at as wire fraud or mail fraud. They knew or should have known, based on their own consultants that they hired, that this was a lie. And now we have the second shoe is dropping now, because Ken Block has gone to the Washington Post and told them what I imagine his people, and he has told the Department of Justice that they were given 12 or more working theories by the Trump campaign of voter fraud, and that they reported that there was no voter fraud at all. I mean, that is a direct quote from Ken Block. Ken Block said that he reported to the Trump campaign that there was no substantive voter fraud uncovered, that none of those theories held any water, and they could not confirm any of the outside claims of voter fraud, and that every claim of voter fraud brought to them by the Trump campaign was false. And here's the linkage, everyone. And Ken Block told that to the Trump campaign. Now, in the links of the chain, Berkeley Research Group gets even closer. They're in the White House telling Donald Trump and Mark Meadows that. And this is the type of continued investigative, dogged work that Jack Smith and the investigators are doing to bring Trump down. For those that wonder, why hasn't he done it sooner? Because he's running down all of these leads. He's subpoenaing all of these parties, the ones that will come in voluntarily, he's meeting with his team. They're getting documents from these people and subpoenaing them, just like he's subpoenaing, Jack Smith's group subpoenaing now the Dominion records from the Fox News defamation case. And Abby Grossberg, the former producer and booker for Tucker Carlson, and all of her 90 audio tapes. They're going after that, but you can only do that with time. and not be rushed and develop your case to get it airtight when you go for the indictment, because things move quickly from indictment to trial to conviction. So that's the new reporting today. If you're wondering what the new reporting is, it's because you probably never heard, unless you live in Warwick, Rhode Island, or you knew Ken Block's failed attempt to run for governor a while ago up in Rhode Island. Unless you heard of Simpatico software systems, this is new information. New information that goes lock and key, hand in glove with the Berkeley Research Group information. So what does Jack Smith have as of right now? Put a pin in it. He's got two separate firms, two separate consultancies hired by Donald Trump. Berkeley Research Group for $600,000, Simpatico hired for $750,000. They went off and worked independently using their own analytic and research methods, and they all reported back to the Trump campaign and or Donald Trump and Meadows themselves and told them there is no voter fraud at all, that none of these theories work. And yet, every moment, every day, Donald Trump, the campaigner, Donald Trump, the president clinging to power and not handing it over until they literally almost had to pull him out by his cold, dead fingers from the White House, from the Oval Office, continued to lie to the American people, knowing that there was a body of counter evidence and opposition evidence that he himself had paid for. That's the reporting that shows you how deep and wide the Jack Smith investigations are. This one looks like it goes, if you're trying to link this up, match grand juries with evidence, because there's at least 3 or 4 grand juries that Jack Smith's running. This is not the Mar-a-Lago one. This is maybe the Jan 6th insurrection siege on the Capitol one and the conspiracy that Donald Trump led around that. But it is definitely going, this information is going in front of the grand jury related to the grift, the false statements made to raise money and to separate his followers, his cult followers, from their cash. There's a word for that in criminal law. It's called fraud. And if that fraud was done by email, it's wire fraud. And if that fraud was done by a mailer to somebody's home, that's mail fraud. And it's the easiest type of fraud for a federal prosecutor to charge. It's why it's almost in every major indictment that involves the money being extracted from somebody, because the statute is relatively simple in order to prosecute. Did the person knowingly make a false statement? And did he obtain something of value from somebody else as a result of that false statement? And did he do it willfully, knowing that it was false in order to get the money? I mean, as I'm saying it out loud, people that follow my hot takes are probably thinking, that's open and shut. That's exactly what he did. But it's one thing for us to speculate. He must have known. He should have known. We know about all the other data, but until you get in that link of the chain, until you get that evidence right on top of the witness, the way hiring 2 research groups to tell you truthful information about the election and then rejecting it and burying your head in the sand, which we call in the business willful blindness, the ostrich theory. You stick your head in the sand, you ignore bad facts, but you can't do that under criminal law because the law doesn't recognize that. You can't bury your head in the sand, get away from bad facts. Now, Ken Block, who appears to have a legitimate business at Simpatico, you can tell he's worried about where the company's going. They're still up on the web. They're still trying to pitch business and contracts to local governments, sell their services as a fraud investigator. Now, if you go on his Twitter, and we'll post one here, if you go on his Twitter, he says the big lie perpetrated by Fox News is a cautionary tale for everybody. You know, now he's on the side of, he's not an election denier. He's like, there's no fraud. He's trying to pitch his new product. He says in his LinkedIn post recently, there's no fraud in elections. There's just, systems and procedures that need to be cleaned up and unified. And so he's pitching himself as a consultant that could do that. But the first read of his LinkedIn, the first read of his tweets, now that he's cooperating with the Department of Justice, is there's no voter fraud. There's no voter fraud. And if you say there's voter fraud, you're going to get hit with a $787.5 million settlement, as a cautionary tale. Why is he doing that? Because he's trying to curry favor with the Department of Justice, get them off his trail, because he'd like to have a continuing operation, a continuing business. Now, whenever he goes and pitches his services to local government, let me help find tax dollars that are being wasted in your local government. I have an analytic software that can do that. That's his product. They're going to say, didn't I just read about you being hired by Donald Trump and Department of Justice subpoena and all that? Oh, yes, but I've done tweets. I'm not an election denier. I recognize there was no fraud at all. I didn't find any fraud. They hired me to find fraud. There wasn't any fraud. I reported that. What Trump did with that's not my fault. So listen, he made a mistake, as most of the lawyers and consultants are making, in thinking that Donald Trump is going to be some sort of positive halo effect on their careers, when it has the exact opposite. They're all becoming radioactive, losing their licenses to practice law and otherwise. So that's the tap dancing that we're watching Ken Block do, now that he's been sucked in to the morass of the Department of Justice investigations. I'm going to follow what happens with Berkeley Research Group and Simpatico software, and the continuing drill down, drill to bottom by Jack Smith and his investigators on fraud, mail fraud and wire fraud perpetrated by Donald Trump, with knowledge that what he was saying was not true. I do these about every day, these kind of hot takes. If you like these, do a thumbs up. It helps with the algorithms, and it helps have me bring content to you in this type of format. Write a comment. I look at the comments. People know that I look at the comments, and it helps improve the show. And then every Wednesday and Saturday on this same network that you're watching or listening to, the MeidasTouch Network, I co-anchor the leading podcast at the intersection of law and politics. We follow all of the politically charged litigation matters around the country that are important to you. We curate the top stories. We bring it to you in an hour-long podcast on Wednesdays and on Saturdays. And then you can follow me on all things social media at MS Popok. But for now, I'm Michael Popok for Legal AF.
Hey, Meidas Mighty. Love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram at MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.